So today what we're going to do is, in this general introduction, is we're just going to provision an Azure Data Factory. I'm going to show you the way to do it using the portal, the Azure portal. There's other ways you can do it. For example, you can use PowerShell. We're going to do a brief tour of Azure Data Factory, and then we're going to build a pipeline, and it's a real live pipeline. I'll actually show you a website where you can go see the results of this pipeline running, and I am ready to get into the demos. I hope you are as well. So let's see. I got to find, there we go. Here's my SQL Trail stuff. And you can see I've been plunking around in here a little bit already. So let me start zooming. I'm pretty sure I don't have it running. Let's see. Let's try it real quick and see. I hate it when I don't have Zoom it running, and I do not, and that's my bad. And you can note that in any feedback that you care to share. So, darn me, I can't. I'm in the wrong folder. Where is the other Andy folder? There's one in OneDrive, and there's one here locally. There we go. Okay, let's try this one more time. Woohoo! Zoom is running. It's always a good thing because my eyes are getting older and I can't see all this stuff. So here you can see that I've been playing around a little bit on a dashboard. I'm going to go ahead and start. This one's labeled SQL Trail 2021. I'm going to start by creating a brand new data factory. And the way you would want to do this is if you go to create a resource like I just did over here. And if you can't find that, sometimes it's kind of hidden. It's snuck in there that way. If you're on one of the main screens, I think this home screen, sometimes it's hard to find. But you can get there, and there's usually a link hanging out here on the left side. If you don't have an Azure account, you can go to azure.com. There's always some kind of deal going on where, like, you can get, for the first month, you can get a whole bunch of free stuff. Once you get in here, there's a couple things that I just want to point out. One is there's two search bars. And if you start typing like Data Factory, this will get you to it. This is one way to look, but I'd much rather you start down here after you click on Create a Resource to begin typing data. And I just type Data Fact, and it's down at the bottom, but you see there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's in here related to it. Azure Data Factory Analytics is the Synapse version of for data ingestion, and this is data engineering. This is what Data Factory does, what SSIS still does, what data transformation did 20 years ago. It's the same sort of solution, but just realize that these solutions, they come and go. But I found Data Factory to be the cloud version of data engineering, data ingestion. There's a nice overview here, some plans and other information you can look at. If you click this create button, it'll take you to what's the browser version of some tabs and walking through this. And you can select a subscription. I happen to have a couple. You can pick a resource group or create a new one. I'm actually going to create a new one called RG SQL Trail. And when I click on that, when I click OK, it's got new beside it. And it allows me to just build everything I need from here. So the stuff that I need, like a resource group is hierarchically above a data factory, it still lets me create one right here. I could use the one in North Europe, but that would be a little far. And I can't remember which one of these East US selections is near, but there's one right down the road here, about an hour east of me, and down in Mecklenburg. Then I get to pick a name. And one of the things about the name is, and I'm just going to type ADF to show you this, it's going to tell me that data factory name is already taken. Choose a different name. Data factory names and some of the stuff in Azure has to be globally unique. So and it'll tell you, it'll check when you start typing names in like this. Other things just need to be unique, like within the resource group. So you can see this doesn't qualify. This resource group technically doesn't exist yet. It's not checking in that resource group. It's looking globally for that. There's some other things here that need to do that as well. I think I may have used SQL Trail already. Looks like I have. So I'm going to get very creative here and make this _2. Really? That's already taken? You're kidding. Let's see. Oh, the name can only contain that. So I needed to refresh the value. By clicking off of it there, it kind of refreshed the value. Let's see if that is a good name. I thought so. ADF SQL Trail there. Version 2 is selected by default. Version 1, they're planning to deprecate it. Interesting, though, that you can still create V1s. V2's been out for, what, 4 years, 5 years now? It's been out for a while. Once you click this is kind of interesting. You can go right to review and create. And I'm going to do that because I want to show you this fails. And I want to show you why. So it does a validation and it says required information is missing or not valid. And then it gives me this little dot over get configuration. I love that they do it this way. I have to go back now to get configuration. You can see, hey, none of this is filled in. All of this stuff is missing. And these are all required. The only one it's not fussing at me about is the repository type, because it selects Azure DevOps by default, but you can configure that to GitHub. I'm going to go ahead and click Configure Git later. And I do this often when I'm doing this. Now I can click on the Review and Create tab. It'll check again, and it says, yep, you're good. You're ready to go. And for a demo purpose, Data Factory, I rarely turn on Git configuration unless I'm demoing, lifecycle management for these. Now I can click create, and when I do that, it'll take me over to the create page, and we're doing this live. This is a lot of my friends and presenters, they say things like don't ever do live demos, and it's part of the reason I do it is I'll often make a mistake, and I want to share with you, especially if you're brand new to this, that mistakes are normal. So I won't say they're good, but they're normal. Now, I just clicked on that Go to Resource button, but I could go back to Home now, and you see it's already updated. I've got RG SQL Trail for the resource group. I've got ADF SQL Trail up here. But even if I didn't have any of that, I could go to Resource Groups, and it would give me this list of resources that are out here. And so as I scroll down this list, you can see there's a couple. There's RG SQL Trail. There's the one I just created. If I was to go look at the overview for RG, for Resource Group SQL Trail, you'd see in the list here, there's the ADF SQL Trail. And when I click on it, I get this little tile that begins to expand. If I click on view, it takes me right to the screen we were just after. This is the overview of ADF SQL Trail. Now, we're about to go into the Azure Data Factory Studio, which was rewritten probably a couple months ago. And I love what they're doing in Azure. They've created this interface template, and I really like it. It took, when I first looked at it, I was like, well, wow, that's different. But this is where we're going to drill into interacting with the development part, if you will, of SQL Trail. But the screen we're looking at right now is not unimportant. This is, as you can see, the overview, activity log, access control. There's a lot of stuff in here. And this is, I want you to think of this as more of an administrative page. So you're going to need both when you do this sort of thing. And so if you click on, and I have to, sorry about that. I forgot to put my phone on don't ding. It's there. When you click on this link, we're going to go into, you see it's starting Azure Data Factory, and this is what it looks like. And this is that interface I was talking about, and a lot of things in Azure now have this. Ingest is one option here. And I'm going to do this just to show you what it looks like. This, if you click on this ingest, it's got a kind of a template here that it's going to run for us. It's the copy data tool. It gives us a couple of options. We can do the built-in copy task that we can run once for now when we're done with it. We can schedule it. And this kind of scheduling is more for like on times. So maybe we want to run this at midnight every night. Tumbling window is an interesting option that we have where we can say we want to time the gap. We basically want to configure the gap between executions. Now, to be fair, you can do this with schedule. You can say in the scheduling, I want to run this every hour. Okay, so maybe whatever we're copying here is fairly large, or we've got slow connectivity to it. And let's say just for demo that it takes 15 minutes to load this. Well, if we were to run this at the next hour, it would start on the hour, and then it would run for 15 minutes and stop. So, and then at the top of the next hour, it would start again and run for 15 minutes. And then it would just keep doing it. It would start at the top of every hour. If we configured a tumbling window, it would, and we put an hour configuration on the tumbling window, it would start at the top of the hour, run for 15 minutes, and then it would wait an hour. So it would wait until 15 past the next hour, and then it would start again. Kind of cool that we have that flexibility. The metadata-driven copy task is in preview. It's new, and it's kind of interesting. I just started tinkering around with this recently, and I love metadata-driven solutions. I think they greatly simplify management of of any solution. So I encourage you to read some about that and learn more about it. I want to go back to the previous page here. Let's see, how can I do that? Can I do it that way? Let me zoom out. It won't let me click previous, but it will let me click cancel. Okay, so I'm back now to kind of the dashboard, and I've got these options over here. If I slide this blade out, I've got home, I've got author, monitor, and manage, and this is the home page. I want to go to author now, and this is where if I want, I can create pipelines all by myself. Now, there's a couple of ways to create pipelines just from the get-go. One is you can hit this large plus symbol, and this is a list of all the things you can create for the most part. There's a few things that aren't up here. I'll show you when we get to pipelines. But these are kind of like the artifacts, if you will, of Azure Data Factory. There's a pipeline, there's a data set, data flows, Power Query. There's a gallery filled with templates. So you can maintain your own templates. There are also templates that are stored out there. You can use other people's templates. You can import from a pipeline template. And then the copy data tool is, well, I believe that's what we just looked at under Ingest. So that's one way to do it. If I look at pipelines here, I don't have any created. So if I open this, you don't see anything. But if I click on the ellipsis here, you can see I can make a new pipeline from here, a pipeline from a template. And here's that thing that's not shown in that big list is a new folder. The reason is I can set folders up at all of these scopes, pipeline, data set, what have you. And so that's why I wouldn't really know where you wanted to put that. I guess they could add that if they wanted. But we're going to pick, in our general introduction, we're going to make a new pipeline. Now, the very first thing I want you to note is it named the pipeline for us. It called it Pipeline 1. We've got a list of activities here. And I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. Go ahead and collapse that. And these activities are what we're going to add to the pipeline. Some of these activities give us interfaces to other things that are smaller, more configuration type stuff. One of them is a data flow that we can configure. This is different from an SSIS data flow. These data flows, the mapping data flows in particular, are driven by Databricks, Azure Databricks, which is like Spark on steroids. And if you're not following anything that I'm saying, go look up Databricks and you'll learn a lot more about that, and maybe Spark as well. We have so many choices now for data engineering platforms and engines, and it's really cool to see the way Azure Data Factory presents all this. I won't go into it an awful lot, but some of the stuff you can look at as you poke around in here. Like you can see this is Hive and Pig and then streaming. There's a lot of activities in here. You can do MapReduce jobs. There's Spark, which is kind of the original open source version, and then some of the team members who built Spark at UC Berkeley, I believe it was, they left and founded Databricks, and Databricks is like Spark on steroids, as I mentioned. There's some machine learning options in here. There's the Power Query activity. These are all called activities, but you can begin to see just poking around in here. There's USQL, which is a language we use to interact with data lakes, Databricks, again, notebooks, and jar files, and Python, Azure functions, which are native to Azure, data exploration, and then move and transform, where we see this is a mapping data flow, and then a copy data operation. We're actually going to use the copy data here in just a minute. Under general, there's a slew of items under here, activities. And I use a lot of these. You can see one here, execute SSIS package. And you're like, what? Yep, you can execute SSIS packages from inside of ADF. Kind of cool. You can also execute pipelines like pipeline 1 that we're working on here. You can also execute other pipelines. And together, both of these give you a nice generic top-level supported way to build Azure Data Factory pipelines that serve as parent pipelines. So you can practice this pattern that others have been doing for decades now, where you have a parent process and it calls a child process. And it's a really interesting way to configure frameworks and the like. And so there's just a lot in here. You remember we saw that metadata driven option when we looked at the ingest blade earlier. Well, metadata driven is also a description of a lot of frameworks that are out there. So we won't go into too much of this, but there's again, this is a general introduction. We're not going to do a tab survey. We are going to go over here and see our pipeline properties. And we're just going to name this one first pipeline, because I'm feeling really creative. And then I'm going to hide these properties. I'm going to slide those over so that I've got a nice big canvas here to work on. We see down here, I can have parameters that are for the pipeline. These are scoped at the pipeline themselves. Other activities have parameters that are involved here. These are variables that are scoped. I'm not talking too much about the difference. Settings for this, concurrency. And anytime in ADF you see one of these little circles with an I in the middle of it, if you hover over that, you'll see a description, the number of simultaneous pipeline runs that are fired. These are almost always filled with useful information. Not always, but almost. And one thing, if I haven't emphasized this yet, I don't believe that I have, one thing you need to get used to if you're going to work in Azure is things change. And they change a lot. They literally change every day in Azure. A couple of years ago, pardon me, I did a webinar online where I was working in ADF, and I walked through my demos, similar demo than what we're going to do today. Walked through my demo, and I did it around midday. And then about 6 hours later, I drove to Richmond to present to one of the user groups there. And I am not making this up. When I got there and started the presentation, something had changed in that little amount of time. So don't be thrown by that. Just roll with it. It's very, very rare these days that something changes in Azure Data Factory and breaks your pipeline or something you've configured. It happens. It's more likely to happen if you're using something still considered preview. But it's been a long, long time since some change broke an ADF pipeline for me. We're going to come back to this output tab, so I'm not really going to go into that too much. We're going to start working here, and I'm going to start with the move and transform. The first thing I'm going to do is drag over a copy data activity. And the data that I'm going to be copying is some of my favorite data ever. It's from a weather station that I have right outside here. And I'll say something, you know, Carlos likes to have interesting stuff show up in SQL Trails. So I'm just going to debut this, if that's okay. I'm going to share with you that my son, Stephen, he and I have been working on some more IoT projects. And this is kind of ugly, but it's also kind of real. So if I zoom in, let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger, but not quite that big, so that my zoom in is still working here. If I go out here and I zoom in, what we see is an application we named, I don't know how to pronounce that. It's a Larry Niven book called Protector, old sci-fi. I'm into it. I've kind of gotten him into it as well. And we're going to call that Blob. But that was the character at the beginning of Protector by Larry Niven. And that's what we named the app and the project here. I don't know. I can't see where the name of the project is here. But anyway, you can watch this run. In fact, if you're looking at this, you can see the numbers are changing. And about every 5 or 6 seconds or so, it gives us a new reading. This is connecting to an IoT device that's actually a couple devices together. It's a Raspberry Pi that we're using to manage the networking for us. And hooked to this is a tiny Arduino controller. We've been playing with these, like the Pico, which is the Pi version of these little controllers that are out there. They're like $4 a piece. I mean, it's crazy what you can get. And this is writing to our now, actually, it's just running along doing nothing. I'm connected to it through this app. And you can see we named this is Greenhouse. We have a greenhouse out there. This is Stevie being funny. He actually blogged about this at his blog, StephenRayLeonard.com. He's got all of the pictures and stuff. He built it and configured it, and he's in charge of that end. I'm just reading it and storing data. But this is brand new. Oops, that was the wrong thing to do. Let me get over here. Let's see if I can get out. I hate it. I've got, now I'm stuck. That's okay. We'll get out, I think, if I can get my mouse over here to work. This is the only bad thing about having there. Okay, that's got Zoom It running, and so does my host now. But that's just what's coming. By the way, we're going to start putting data out there in a little bit. We built a greenhouse last year, and we're measuring the temperature out there. We just recently put a stove in it, and you can follow me on Instagram, Andy. I think it's Leonard763 out there. And we got pictures and stuff of the greenhouse project. Anyway, I say all that. Here's our copy data. And we're going to name this copy weather data. That's going to be the name of it. There's a lot of properties in here that we're just going to ignore. You'll note that asterisk is telling me that's required. So I've already done that. Now, there's a couple of ways you can approach building your first Azure Data Factory pipeline. One nice way to do it, and I love this opportunity, is flexible order of authoring. And that's the way we're going to do it. The other way is you build kind of the things you need first, and then you go build a pipeline. Maybe you'll pick up what I'm saying here as we do this. There are no data sets in this instance of Azure Data Factory at all. We have to create a new one. So we're creating one for a new source. When I click that, it did this new data set blade over here, and it's got a lot of sources in here. The one we're going to use is Azure Blob Storage. And I've already got some stuff that I need for the Azure Blob Storage. A lot of sources in here, the formats of data. Excel is the latest one. Believe it or not, they didn't have Excel in here for the longest time. They added it a year or two back. And that was that's good. I'm glad it's in there. But if I click on delimited text, it has CSV on it. I'm going to be using a CSV file. And when I click continue, it says, hey, set the properties for this. So one of the properties is what's the name of your data set. So I'm going to name this one dataset underscore AccuWrite weather. That's the name. AccuWrite is the name of my, it's a manufacturer of my weather station. And I'm going to go get the CSV file. Now, here's where the flexible order of authoring comes in. I don't have any link services created at this point either. And so I'm going to click new here. It's going to open another blade on top of that blade. And I want to go to Azure Blob Storage for my AccuWrite weather. weather underscore CSV file. And I tend to name them like this. You can put in descriptions if you'd like. The only integration runtime I have running right now is the auto resolve. I'm going to stay with that one, but there's some interesting information you should read about that. I'm going to use the SAS URI, Shared Access Signature, and I think it's Universal Resource something. I don't remember what the URI stands for. Another bubble here tells me a bunch of good stuff about that. Now, let's zoom out. And I didn't mean to do Control R. I meant to hit the 4, but I hit the R. Now, on here, I've got a text file, I think. Maybe I closed my text file. That wasn't good. No, I did not close it. And on it, I've got the I've got some of the information that I need. Now, I got all of the information I need, by the way, from Azure, Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer. You can download this. It's free. It's storageexplorer.com. That's where you go to get it. And one of the things I can do once you get it configured is I can right-click here on Storage Explorer, and I can copy that URL. And I need to do that because that's one of the things it's asking me for here. It says, so you're going to use a URI, a Shared Access Signature URI. First, I need the URL. So it's got a sample of what it might look like. I'm just going to right-click and paste this plain text. There's my URI. Now, the other thing that I need, let's see if I can zoom out. And over here, I've got on the, you can't see this, but I stored this in a Notepad file because, you know, Notepad rocks. And I'm just going to paste, again, my SAS token. Paste that as plain text. Now, once I'm done with that, you can see down here, I can test this connection. And if I click that, it's going to let me know whether it's going to allow me in or not. We see the connection was successful. If I go here and delete some of my SAS token and try again, it should give me an error. Oh, well, I guess not. Okay. I guess it's just checking to see if I'm aimed at it. But I'm going to go ahead and paste the whole thing in there again. I thought that would work, but I guess not. All right, let's try it this way. I want to break it. I want it to not work. Okay. It's bad when you can't get things to break. I'm going to go ahead and click Create. What is it creating? Again, this is creating a linked service. So you can think about a linked service as a way to reach outside of Azure Data Factory. In this case, I'm reaching over to Azure Blob Storage, and I'm doing that. You can think of the data set, what we've got here now. You can think of this as being like one layer in the onion. ADF pipelines are like onions, or data factories are like onions. Quote from, almost a quote from Shrek. The container I happen to know is named CONT for container, AW for Andy Weather, and the file, I think if I click the browse, I can get to it. I'll either get that or this error. I'm not really sure why, how that works, obviously. But if I type the name in, AccuWriteWeather.csv, the first row is a header. And if I now click OK, it should complete that configuration of that data set. And we see now there's my source. Now, I'm a big test-driven person. So one of the things I want to do here is click on Preview Data. So why do I click on Preview Data? Preview Data is checking a whole bunch of these moving parts that I just tested. Remember, I've got the source, but not the sink configured of a copy data activity. And what I just tested was the data set through the linked service to the file in Azure Blob Storage. I can see data. So this is a really good sign that this part at least is going to work. There's a whole lot more stuff here that we are not going to configure. We don't have to because of this. But when we click on sync, don't let that word sync throw you. My degree is in electronics engineering, so I'm used to thinking about sources and sinks. That's just the way we talk. When you bring that into data, it's really, you can think about it as sources and destinations, or sync can be a target, just whatever makes your mind work well. Now, we just configured a data set over here, right? Source data set. What we're going to see here at sync is that data set's going to show up in the list. But this is not the kind of data set that we need. We're going to write to an Azure SQL database. So when we click on New again, scroll down a little, there is an Azure SQL database. We'll click Continue, and it's saying, you know, what do you want to write to? I want to write to a weather data, a weather data table. It's asking me for my link service. Notice there are no link services here, but wait, we just configured a link service. We did, but that was for Azure Blob storage. So it knows we're going after a SQL table. And it said, we're just not going to show you anything that isn't Azure SQL. There's my database, and I'm going to do underscore weather data. For this, I can put in a description. Going to use the auto resolve integration runtime again. And I can enter stuff manually, or I can pick it from an Azure subscription. I'm going to go ahead and pick my enterprise data and analytics subscription. And what I'm looking for is, as I'm going to use this SQL Trail 2021 database, and I've got one in here called DB SQL Trail 2021 data. I'm just going to reuse that. My username is admin Andy for this, and my super secret password is, you thought I was going to say my password, didn't you? Okay, so let's test it. And our connection was successful. We're going to go ahead and click create here. What did we just do? We created the link service. It tells me there in the little bubbles that popped up there, successfully created that. And now we're at the data set properties. It says set here. It means data set. And it's now asking for the table name. Well, we want to pick that table. It's named dbo.wxreading, WX for weather. Do we want to edit it? We could. There's a bunch of advanced properties we're really not going to look at. And then we're going to click OK here. Now, when we do this, there's one option on this one that I want to look at. And I just want to show you here. It says in Precopy Script, specify a script for the copy activity to execute before writing data into the sync table each run. You can use this to this property to clean up preloaded data. There's a number of things you can do here. There's note that you can use a stored procedure as a sync data set here. There's a bunch of stuff here that you can do. We're not going to really touch on that, but we are going to execute a script before we go here. We're going to call a stored proc actually before we run. Notice that if we're looking at this mappings page, we don't see anything by default. But if we click import schemas, it's going to show us these are the fields that are inside of my table. And sorry, these are the fields in my table. This is the fields in my source. And it's going to map these fields from my source file into these columns in my table. I'm pretty sure the reason they're lining up is because I built the table with the fields in the same order, but I'm not positive of that. And now, of course, we can again go preview the source and see that same thing we saw earlier. We already knew this was working. At this point, we can execute a load here. But there's one thing I want to do before we get here. I want to go to this database, and let's bring over SSMS. This is version 1810, the new version, which I find loads a little quicker than the old one. There's the table we're going to end up loading here. But I'm going to create a new, I'm going to do a new stored procedure. I'm just going to open a new query window there from the database. And I'm not going to do the stuff I usually do where I check to see if it exists and all of that stuff. But I'm going to name it Truncate WX Reading. And you'll never guess what it's going to do. That's right. Truncate table, dbo.wx reading. And I'm just going to execute that. So if we go look right now at, that's how I created it. If we go look at a select star, and I'm going to do a count star, we see there's 151,276 in there. So I'm going to go back to my definition here. And I don't know if you know you could do this or not, but I'm just going to highlight that and click execute. And it should run that stored proc. So it gives me a command completed successfully. And if I rerun this, I see 0 rows. So it looks like it did what I wanted it to do. The other thing that I had this query set up to do was I'm converting to a date time, the WX reading date time column. The reason is it's coming in as text. When you load a flat file, you want to get that data into the database first. So I recommend staging it as text. And these are all invarchar 50s, as you can see over here. That's a fair way to do it. But, you know, figure out what you need to do to get it into the database. It's really hard to do things like order by when you're trying to pull from a file. So, in fact, it's possible. Don't get me wrong, but it involves some other language than T-SQL to do all of that. So, and you may actually be able to do it. As I'm sitting here thinking about some bulk copy operations and open row sets, but I'm using Azure Data Factory here to do the data pumping for me. So what I want to do, I want to call that stored procedure every time before I do the load. And look, I've got a stored procedure activity right here under General. So I'm going to name this one Truncate Target, stored procedure Truncate Target. And in settings, I'm going to go to the SQL Server link service. And when I do that, look, it's loading right there. It's actually reading my stored procs. And then it shows up my new one. I could click refresh here if it didn't show up. And I just want to tell this, look, when you succeed, I want you to go and run the copy data part after you're done the truncating part. So it could be that I may want something else. So if I click on this and delete it, I may say, you know, when you complete. So completion is, it doesn't really care if it succeeds or fails. It just cares if it's done. And I do care, but note I've got two other options, failure and skipped. Again, you can learn a whole bunch more of those by digging into the docs at Microsoft.docs. So I've got this all configured. I've got, first I'm going to truncate the target, and then I'm going to do the copy weather. Now, a couple of things. One of them is, you can see up here, there's 3, and it says publish all beside it. That means there's 3 things that it's ready to send out there when I do the publish. So I'm going to go ahead and click publish all. And when I do, it's going to bring up this blade. It says, hey, here's the 3 new things that you're trying to publish. You've got the first pipeline, and you've got these couple data sets here that you're saying publish. Down here at the bottom, I click publish, and I want to say they just added that blade about a year ago. We got a little spinny thing happening here. It's publishing these 3 resources, and when it's done, it'll tell me publishing completed. You see how I timed that? Don't try this at home, kids. I'm a professional. All right, when I run debug now, this is not running the stuff I just published. I want you to be aware of that. When I run debug right now, it's going to run this in a kind of a secure location here, a little play area that it's built for executing these types of runs. And you saw that it had already succeeded in a truncate stored procedure. And when I clicked on these little glasses, I did this quick. So let me go back and do it again. Here's my copy data. This is going to take about a minute to run anyway. You see this details with the little geeky glasses on it? I don't think those are geeky at all, but I am a geek, so I wear different type of style of glasses. You can see it's running, and it's been going for about 28 seconds, at least when I opened it here. Still in progress. I love this part right here, the throughput. This is going to drop a little as time progresses. But what it's telling me is how many kilobytes per second it's running. We see it's down from like 4 something to 334. And in a minute, this is going to show me that it succeeded. It's also telling me, I believe, how many rows it's read. I don't think it tells me how many rows it's written yet. Not yet. But it will once it finishes. It'll give me that piece of information. It's about 151,000 rows in here. There it is, 151,291. And we're going to see this live data. There's a whole story behind this I didn't tell you. But it's being loaded from a weather station that's out on my deck that way, about 40 yards that way. there's a machine over here that picks it up like every hour and sends it to Azure Blob storage. That's the Blob storage that we connected to. And so now we see that it's all succeeded and it ran. If we go back to SSMS and run our query, we might see an extremely recent reading here. I'm hoping we do. Look at there, 1 p.m. Boom. So this data is, it's only being loaded every hour, but it loads it about 12 minutes past the hour. Kind of a long story there, but it loads like an hour's worth of data every time. It actually truncates, in this case, and loads that data, and that's what it does. You can see that it's the outdoor temperature right now here in Farmville, Virginia, should be 75.4. That's what my readings are telling me. It says outdoor temperature. I'm not sure if that's really outdoor. It may be indoor. Let's see. We've got another. Yep. Nope. There's my indoor temperature, 70. Those, I don't know. Those may be backwards, but I think that's right. I'll take its word for it. I think that's the correct stuff. So that being said, it did everything that we told it to do. There's 151,291 rows there. That's what it loaded. That's what we asked it to load. And if we go back and look at this, we can see in our details that is also how many rows it read. That's always a good thing when the row counts match. One last thing. We have the ability here under Add Trigger. We're not going to configure a trigger, but we can click Trigger Now. Now, when we do this, we get a warning, Trigger Pipeline now using the last published configuration. That's why we published it. And when we click OK here, we can now go to the Monitor page. And over on Monitor, we can see first pipeline is running. It's in progress for the very first time ever. So this is a lot like the row we see in the Output tab when we're running it in Debug. This is running in the For Real engine, the auto-resolve integration runtime. And if we scroll around here, we see there's a run ID, annotations. There's no parameters in this, so it's not getting any of that. This is the original run. Now, what that means is this is the first time this execution is run. I really shouldn't have gone there because that's confusing. But you can rerun the same execution of a pipeline, just so you know. When I click on this link, we get something that looks remarkably similar to what we saw on the debug run. And if we click on the details here, we can see very much the same data that it's in progress on. We see our peak connections here. And again, hover over the little eye. What does peak connections mean? It's the peak number of concurrent connections established to the source data store during the activity run. So you can see it here. It's at 1 minute, 8 seconds there a couple seconds ago. It's getting close. It's getting close to being done. It's written 61,000 rows out of the 151. I bet you that's not right. I'll bet you it's written more than that by now. But we'll see in just a minute. It'll complete just like we saw before. And if we go back now to our trigger runs, pipeline runs here, we see that it just succeeded. It took 1 minute 43. That's what our duration is showing us. And if we want, this is what I meant by rerun. That would not be the original. It would give us a rerun under here. And we could see a whole list of objects there. There's a bunch of detail in here for monitoring. The consumption is a way to monitor how many resources that the execution consumed in its run. Something that we didn't cover, but I want to look at the manage page here, because you can see there's a link services that we use flexible order of authoring to kind of drill down from the top as we were building the pipeline and especially configuring the copy activity. We created both of these link services. I think you remember that. First, we created the data sets, and then there was a link service drop down, and we just clicked new in there, and it took us to the create new link services. You could start here. This is the outer edge of what we're doing today. You could have come here first, click new, built all the link services you needed, then gone into data sets over here on the author page. And you can see we have data sets. There's our 2 data sets that we built. You could have come here, click new data set. built on top of the link services, and then you could have gone to the pipeline and just picked what you wanted. Either way, but it's kind of cool to have the option. Excuse me. Like I said, things are changing all the time. Here's a link to Azure Purview. I think this link functionality is new, but it allows you to hook into this brand new piece of functionality for data governance. That's what Purview does. You can learn a lot about it just poking around in there. Azure Purview isn't in preview anymore. In fact, it's only been out, it's been about a month. It went into what they call GA, or general availability. But you can interconnect these, and it's not a bad idea to do it. You can configure your source control here with Get, ARM templates. There's a whole slew of things you can do here. You can look at your integration runtimes. This is that one that you get for free when things start running, auto-resolve integration runtime. You can make new integration runtimes. So this is how, for instance, if you want to move your SSIS from executing on premises to in Azure Data Factory, you can do what's called lift and shift. And you can copy SSIS packages right into Azure Blob Storage file shares and execute them using an integration runtime here, an Azure SSIS integration runtime. Or if you have a catalog, you can lift and shift them from your on-premises catalog to a catalog in the cloud. So a lot of options here that you have using this. But I just kind of want to review that tab. I didn't go through everything. Also didn't go through everything here on the monitored page, but this is a pretty good get your feet wet pipeline to kind of gently introduce Azure Data Factory. Let's see. I think that part's done. Let's see. Let's go to our slides again. I'd be happy to answer any questions starting now. I know we've got a few minutes left in the presentation, but I will go back over and address any questions that are in there. Before I do, you can learn more about me at andyleonard.blog. That's my blog. /learn-more. And if you have any need for help, I do consulting, I do training. Other than training at SQL Trail, I've got like days of training that are available. You can reach out to me at andy.leonard@entdna.com. So definitely thanks for hanging out here. Thanks, Carlos and the gang, for letting me have this privilege and honor of presenting at SQL Trail. And I thank you for you all for showing up. So let's pop over to the SQL Trail bit.
Thank you, Andy. Right, it's being it's great having you. We do have a question here, and I've got a couple that I'd like to follow up with. Right, I suppose one of the perks of being able to put yourself on stage, right? You know,
that's right.
So Kevin is asking about speed, right? And I think ultimately slower than ADO record set call to an SSAS server. So I think just in terms of moving the data and perhaps, and you know, Kevin, right, maybe you can help us here in the chat. But the way I'm reading his question is, you know, so I'm moving data on premise. You know, it feels like I have a little bit more control. I'm now moving over the internet, right? What kind of speed or performance considerations do you have, or recommendations, right? Or I don't want to say problems, right?
Sure, sure.
Have you had?
So the typical answer, Carlos can say this. What's the typical answer, Carlos?
Well, you know, it depends, Andy.
It depends, right? So what does it depend on? Let's expand on that a little bit. And I think maybe I'm assuming here, but drilling into the heart of your question is like, where would I want to use ADF? Where would I rather use something different? And I like ADF when my sources are in the cloud. Optimally, if my sources and targets are in the cloud, it's an easy win to go up there and run it in what I call pure ADF. building pipelines like I did here. And you'll note that both of my source and target in this demo were in the cloud. And it becomes kind of a cloud-to-cloud operation at that point. I'm viewing it, but it's not local at all. The local part's already been handled for me. Yes, I've got a weather station with instruments 40 yards that way. I've got some stuff over here that's actually collecting the CSV file and then writing it up to Blob storage once an hour. After that, I've decoupled. And what you see in the pipeline actually runs in my production environment, which, you know, it's a very simple pipeline, but it's a great demo pipeline. And I learned so much. I've had this running now for a couple of years, and I've just been watching ADF kind of churn along there. I've seen when things fail. I've seen when they introduce breaking changes. It's been a while, but you know, when you're doing cloud to cloud, it's a really good option. It's not just not a bad option. It's a really good one. Now, when I'm interacting with what I call hybrid, where either my source or target is on premises, then I have to make a decision. And I mentioned you can run SSIS in an Azure Data Factory, Azure SSIS integration runtime. And I've done both. I've run SSIS locally and just targeted a cloud source or destination. I've done both. I've read from a cloud, running SSIS on premises, and then written to the cloud, doing it that way. And there's checks and balances, and it starts to get into the it depends arena at that point.
Sure.
But it's great to have options. Let me say that. And kudos to the teams at Microsoft, both ADF and the SSIS teams. They have reproduced the ways of running SSIS in the cloud that exists on premises. In fact, any way you're running SSIS right now, you can reproduce that and run it in the cloud. So there's that piece. And now you have this other option completely apart from SSIS, this whole other platform of ADF pipelines that we talked about today. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So in terms of, I mean, again, right? So very, very, very difficult. So I feel like, but because I am going to get charged by what my compute, right, when I'm running.
Yeah.
Do you have any guidance for folks in terms of, okay, well, when you start putting up pipelines, right, this is what you need to start thinking about in terms of costing? I mean,
yeah.
I would definitely say that of all the services, ADF is probably on the the lighter spectrum, right? Because you can get, you mentioned Databricks and some of these other pieces, right? That will burn through your wallet, fairly very quickly. But so thoughts around pricing, and again, that's a loaded question, right? Because are we talking about one pipeline or a million, right? And that's obviously going to change things.
Well, you bring up a really good point, and we're not picking on Databricks,
Sure.
but one of the nice features of Databricks is its auto scaling. So, like, if maybe I'm picking on SSIS a little bit here. If I'm doing a pretty heavy load on SSIS and I run out of RAM, say for a lookup operation, the package fails at that point. When you have similar interactions in Databricks, you can configure it so that it scales. Now, there's limits you can place on it. And before you start firing up large loads in Databricks, that's one of the things you're going to want to look at for the reasons Carlos pointed out. The kind of the other side of the coin with auto scaling is it also auto charges you.
Right.
It's like, great. It ran, 100 times faster because it scaled up, 100x. Well, so did your bill, at least for that amount of time. And Microsoft has been diligent, in my humble opinion, in the last year, putting bounds around that. And where it comes into play, especially with ADF and Databricks, is mapping data flows. So that's where it's running on Databricks. And under the hood, you can tell it, again, you can set some limits on the scaling of the Databricks cluster. And Now, one of the things that got a few people was that once that thing fired up, it would just continue to run for, I think it was a week. That was the old default. And that's not free. Now you've got this cluster scaled up that's sitting there chewing away at your wallet. They changed that. I want to say they set the default down to an hour, and they added a TTL, or time to live option, where you can configure that. So you tell it how long after it's done to hang out, to hang out in RAM in case you need to spin up another one. It's not, it's not without, it doesn't spin up on a dime. It takes a little while to spin one of these up and then to scale it. It's getting, all of that is getting faster and faster. And Microsoft, to their credit, is aware of I feel, legitimate complaints about managing costs. If you're, another option that you have is, if you're concerned about it, the REST APIs for a number of these services. I'm most familiar with Azure SSIS integration runtime, and that too will burn you. It'll turn on, you turn on an integration runtime, and what you're doing when you do that is it's serverless. I'm doing the air quotes. There are virtual machines, virtual servers being spun up in the background. They call them nodes. And you may default to having 8 of those nodes configured. And, when they're sitting there running, virtual machines cost money. Whether they're doing anything or not, just being on, they charge you. And some of the smaller ones, I want to say, are in the $600-700 a month range. So they're not cheap. But the APIs that are there, that you can call from Azure Data Factory, you can say, shut down this entire IR, this integration runtime. And in fact, whenever I configure one now, the very first thing I do is I go to Andy's blog, Leonard.blog, and I search for, turning off integration runtimes. And I've got some code in there. I didn't come up with this. I've got a link to a blog post that I learned it from my friend Sandy Winarco, who manages SSIS for Microsoft now. He's the one who wrote the original post. And it tells you how to do that. I say all that to say this. I'm not the only one blogging about this, about how to turn things on and off when you need them. And you got to be careful about, how you do that, right? Because the way I'm showing you how to do it, and the way Sandy showed me, is if nothing else is running. You got a couple dozen packages in there that could be running and not running. You got to manage that, right? You don't want to turn it off in the middle of it executing. That'd be bad. That would be bad. There's stuff for the other services, Databricks and the like. There's REST APIs out there for that. And learn how to manage that, preferably before you get a big bill. That's the best time to learn. The second best time is right after you get a big bill. Of course, now you got to pay a big bill. Yeah. So don't be like me and run up a big bill and then have to go do that. So there's a lot to it. The cloud is a different paradigm, and there's different gotchas and that sort of stuff. And a number of people, have a bad experience, and they post how ugly the cloud is and how they hate it. And it's like, first, learn how to use it, and then you may encounter something that's bad or wrong. And if you do, Microsoft can be accommodating. It's totally up to them. It's their cloud. So at least Azure. So
does that, I mean, and maybe, so let me reframe my question here. So this is, intro, right? Folks here are, interested in, getting started, and, perhaps they've been using it, or perhaps they'd like to just get around and play, right? You have to get in there and, kind of understand how it works, right? We just mentioned that. So in terms of, well, and you mentioned it, you can sign up for a free trial, you get some free credits, right?
Yeah.
But you go to your boss, and you're like, hey, I'd like to learn this, right? How much do you need to ask for, right? I mean, does it seem reasonable? Is it to be like, hey, is $50 a month, right, gonna get me to kind of where I need to, feel confident, not that I can be Andy Leonard, right, but I can,
You need to aim higher. I'll say that first if you want to be Andy Leonard. I share this often that I've been trapped in here with me for 58 years, and I'm just not that impressed. I'm just telling you. So, but you know, $50 a month, probably a fair way to go. There's a lot of services that are very inexpensive, and they change deals every month. I haven't looked in the past few months to see what they've got going. The last time I looked, they had a 30-day thing where they would kick in something like 200 USD. So you could play around with a whole bunch of stuff that may cost you money later. And then after that first 30 days, they had another thing that went for the remaining 11 months in your first year, where a number of services were either free or you got so many bucks. I forget. I think it was like $100 USD that you could play with a month. And then after that, it became pay as you go. And sometimes they'll run specials like that. At least they have in the past. I'm not sure when they're going to do that sort of stuff, if ever again. I got in a long time ago and started running, back when I was an MVP the first time, when Azure was way less complex than it is now and functional. And they basically I've got one account that's, I don't know, 10, 12 years old, and I get $150 a month at that account, and I will until I cancel it, and I'm never canceling it. I'm telling you right now. But it's just an area to play in. I'd say 50 to $100 is probably enough to ask the boss for. There are also a number of deals that attach to other services. I want to say things like subscriptions to visualstudio.com. Some of those will give you $100, $150 a month, stuff like that. Yeah, and it may be something you really need, right? And it may work out to save you money if you put those together.
Yeah.
So I'd say go check those sorts of things and see what you can come up with.
Yeah, there you go. That's fair. So let's see. Kevin asks, is Azure Data Center independent?
Well, they're all owned by Microsoft. The physical data centers are, and they're all over the globe. And so I don't know of anything that's technically independent there. So I would look at it this way: you've got official cloud stuff, and it's more than just Azure. There's other clouds out there, and there just seems to be one popping up every few months now. A lot of them allow you to do something like a virtual machine, infrastructure as a service, and when you do that, you can put SQL Server and and whatever you want on that VM and address it that way. Microsoft's products, to their credit, are designed in such a way that the connections are integrated, and as far as SQL Server or ADF or any of these services are concerned, connecting to a virtual machine on another cloud is just as easy as supplying a connection string. And that I love about that. I was poking around recently, and in one of the drop downs, I think it may actually be that one for the metadata driven that I just talked about briefly. One of the options in the drop down, in fact, the top one is like Amazon RDS. So, they're still competitors. Don't get me wrong, AWS and Azure, but they're starting to recognize on both ends of this that, hey, we're stronger together than we are trying to block each other and that sort of stuff. I'm glad to see that that's kind of gone away, and there's a lot of interaction between the Azure cloud and other services where they were just the bitterest of enemies a few years ago. So it's good. We all win when they play nice. That's kind of the cool part of it. So I would say, from an independent standpoint, the next layer down from what I'd consider clouds are data centers, and there are private data centers that are independent. And one interesting aspect that you didn't ask about this, Kevin, is I actually had this happen I can't remember when. I want to say it was around the beginning of this year. There was some political stuff that happened, and some people got really nervous, and a couple of services got deplatformed. And I won't say the number, but I had a number of clients reach out to me, friends of mine that I know that are actually at, different in their political views, who they vote for. But both of them saw, all of them saw this, both sides saw this and said, what if that happens to me? How would we respond if something happens and all of a sudden we're deplatformed? And the interest in multi-cloud became real at that time. And I've helped a few clients consider that and actually stand up services that are in a different cloud that they could switch to if either this cloud, and it's not just for, I made a big deal about the political part of it, but it could be anything. I mean, Azure's gone down.
Sure.
Some of the other clouds have too. You want multi-cloud for, other reasons other than, you getting kicked off of one. And that's become a thing. And the solution that I've taken so far with clients who are concerned about this is I have gone multi-cloud, at least 2, most of the time 3. And then I've gone to a couple data center providers as well, so that hopefully they'll have, they'll be able to continue operations should something bad happen to one of the clouds. We want to do business continuity. That hasn't gone away. They still want to stay up and in business.
Sure.
So it's a great question.
Yeah. Andy, thanks so much for being here with us today. Yep.
Thank you, Carlos.
SQL Data Partners.